Okay. As I said last week, we are studying in the book of John. We're going to be in the book of John for a little while, it looks like. And we actually started reading from the book of John, and we did verse 1 last week. We made it a whole verse, but full detail because I just came up with the idea. I can't say I just came up. I think the Lord led me to start wanting to study the book of John. So I want to do a little more introduction to the book of John again. Last week, the first verse that we read from the book of John was from 1 Kings. Can you imagine that? We're studying the book of the Gospel of John, and we went to 1 Kings. But we need to know, and I did not bring this up last week, the conditions in the nation of Israel at the time of Christ's return, even of the time of Christ's birth. So what I want to do is look at what was going on in the world at that time. As you guys turn to the last page of Malachi, and you go to the last page of Malachi and flip the page one more time, what do you have after that? We're talking about the very next page. Oh, we have kind of like a blank page there, right? So we have a period from Malachi to the New Testament. There should be a blank page, or it'll have, a half a page, of this or that. But it's called the intertestamental period. God did not reveal anything to us in those 400 years, from Malachi to the Gospels. Our Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but we started in the Gospel of John. Whenever you're reading the book of Malachi, you'll notice, well, you might not notice because we don't have the original language, that they're living in Jerusalem. Their rulers are the Medo-Persian Empire. The language that they're speaking is Aramaic, but whenever we turn it over to the New Testament, what language are we speaking? Mostly speaking. Our Bible is written in, well, the Romans are in charge, but the language is Greek, right? The language is Greek. So we go back to Malachi. The nation is being ruled by the Medo-Persian Empire. That's because the Medo-Persians had rose up against the Babylonians and conquered them and took over their whole territories. Luckily, under King Cyrus, they let Nehemiah and Ezra go back into the land and rebuild the walls and the temple. So they had went back and started rebuilding, and that's whenever the next nation popped up, which was, well, we'll start over. But anyways, let me get back to this point here. Between Malachi and Romans, is the Bible silent? What's on that page, Miss Debbie? On your page there? Nothing. It's completely blank, unless you have a Bible that goes in. Yours invisible. Yeah, you don't have a Old Testament here and a New Testament there. And you have a little blank section down at the bottom of your page too. And then the next thing you know, you're reading, okay, this is the book of Matthew, the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and all that. So in between the testaments, in between Malachi and Matthew, is there anything written? The answer is no. But God was not silent. God was not silent in that period. I got to go here because I got all of my, and we're going to do this as quickly as possible, my goodness sakes. Okay, where did I send that? Right there. In the book of Daniel. Daniel is actually speaking between Malachi and Romans, and he gives us an update on what's going on, except he doesn't do it as if he was there. He does it as if it was about to happen. So Daniel, in Daniel chapter 7, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, the other one was like an eagle, and I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus, "Arise, devourer of the flesh." And after this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird, the beast also, and the 4 heads, and the dominion was given to it. After this I saw a night vision. Behold, a 4th beast, like dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were with it, before it, and it had 10 horns. We're going to stop there. So here we go, because we're not studying in the book of Daniel, trust me. So Daniel tells us what's going to happen in between the intertestamental period here. So we left off with after Malachi, and they're speaking Aramaic, and here we start up, and we're in the book of Matthew, and they're speaking Greek. That's something else. The first beast, the lion, Daniel watches the wings are torn off like a beast. The 4th beast is the kingdom of Babylon. The first beast, excuse me. The second beast in Daniel's vision was raised up, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth. It was the Medo-Persian Empire. The leopard, the 3rd beast, that was the Greek Empire. And the 4th beast we know as the Roman Empire. So Daniel had a vision that came from God. Matthew, you can put that first bubble slide up there, that one that has, not that one. That's a good one, but I need the other one. Okay, there we go. So we have Malachi back there at, does that say 430 BC? So that's the book of Malachi. And so after the Medo-Persians had taken over the world at that time in 400 BC, or prior to it, Malachi's last prophecy was written in our Old Testament. So about the same time, there was a man named Philip of Macedon. Have you guys ever heard of Philip of Macedon? Philip of Macedon had a great son. Philip of Macedon had been alive, and he was with the Macedonians, and he united the Macedonians and the Greek. He was assassinated. And when Alexander the Great was about 19 years old, now Alexander the Great up until that point was being taught by Aristotle. So Alexander the Great was like a bookworm, and he didn't show any kind of military prowess. But when his father was killed, Philip of Macedon, Alexander had a burning in him, and he wanted to get revenge, unfortunately. So the Greek Empire arises, and by 331, Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire had conquered the known world. The reason in the Bible Daniel says this 3rd beast was like a leopard is because of how fast that they actually did it. The Greek Empire just steamrolled. They were like 10 times worse than the Blitz in our modern World War II, when the Germans blew across Europe. So the Greek had taken over the whole known world at the time. So at the age of 33, Mr. Great got sick, and he passed away. But before he died, they asked him, because his kingdom was still in charge of everything, who will lead us now? And I guess in his dying breath, he said, give it to the strong. Give it to the strong. So he had 4 great generals that were under him, and they were given the power of the kingdom of Greek, and they split the kingdom into 4 separate provinces, I guess, if you want to call it that. Now, 2 of these were the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So these are the two key ones that we got to remember. So that was around 327, I believe, BC, and Alexander the Great had passed away, and he left in charge to 4 people to be in charge of his kingdom. And Ptolemy and Seleucid was 2 of those provinces. The Seleucids were up around Syria, Lebanon, north of Israel, and the Ptolemies were south of Israel, like Egypt and Libya and all of that. And so they started having inner fights between them. And so they fought, and guess who was in the middle of this little tiny nation? Just like we have now, the nation of Israel is right in the middle. Anyways, the Seleucids became more powerful than the Ptolemies, and they had I need to be able to read this. Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was the leader of the Seleucids. Have we ever heard of him before? He's not in our Bible. Antiochus Epiphanes. And this is around, I guess, 300 BC. Well, no, it was actually around 170 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes. And he's Greek, but he's part of this alliance that he had with up there in Jordan and Syria and Lebanon. And he was his kingdom was part of the 4 that the Greeks, he was Greek. Let's just keep that. At this time, the Greek language became very predominant in all the world. But anyways, Antiochus Epiphanes was very evil. He had went into Israel, and he had got rid of all of their sacrifice systems, their priests. He himself had his people burn pigs on the altar of the Lord and sacrifice with pigs. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine this man? The gall he would have to go into this little kingdom and say, oh, I'm going to, and you know that pigs are not kosher. And the Jewish people absolutely did not like that. He burnt pigs. He made the people eat the meat from the pigs until one day he goes into a little village called Modin. And there was a man there named Matthias Maccabeus. This is why I can't teach, because I start crying too much. Matthias Maccabeus and his son Judas, the Hammer Maccabeus, they called him, killed one of the generals of Antiochus Epiphanes and started a revolt called the Maccabean Revolt. This lasted for 24 years, but eventually the Seleucids were kicked out of Israel by the Maccabees. When they finally got back to Jerusalem and they wanted to institute their own sacrifice system again, they only had enough oil to burn for one day, and the oil had to burn for 8 days. Well, we know the story. That's Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. The reason I say this and I'm so passionate about it is because in the book of John, Jesus goes to Jerusalem during the Festival of Lights. I don't know if he was celebrating it. He may have been. It's not canon. But if Jesus goes there, I believe this actually happened. It was a miracle in between the testaments, and that happened around 163 BC. So from Malachi to then, they were under the Medo-Persian rule and the Greek rule. And then around 63 BC, another great nation, the last nation, the dreadful nation that pops up in the book of Daniel. Remember, the leopard was the Greeks. Now we have the last beast that Daniel had talked about. Let me see here. This beast, terrifying and frightening. It was very powerful, had bronze claws, large iron teeth. Its victims trampled underfoot. It had 10 horns. The creature represents the Roman Empire. So the Romans in 63 BC under Pompey finally make it into and conquer the Greeks. And so that's where we are at the beginning of the New Testament. The Romans set up the Hasmonean kingdom. Who was the king? And he was a puppet king, but do we know who the king was at the time of Jesus' birth? Herod the Great. There was a problem with Herod the Great, though. He was mentally ill, but there was another problem. I talked to the pastor, and from where my studies that I found, Herod the Great was not even Jewish. But the pastor, I'm going to let you know that there's different. He was Jewish, but he wasn't from the line of David. In my study, I found out that he was not Jewish, but he married a Jewish lady, and he was set up by the Romans because of certain favors he did for them. He was Hasmonean, and he was the king at the time of the birth of Jesus. Okay? And that's why whenever the wise men came from the east, he was like, go find this baby and tell me where he's at so I can go and worship him. Did he want to go worship Jesus? No, because he was a fake king. You know, we got fake news. He was a fake king. He wanted to kill Jesus. Also, at the same time, there was two. I don't know if you can put those. Let me see here. The Sadducees, the written stuff that I had. I don't think I'll be able to read it. Okay, we have the Sadducees. I can't see it either. The Sadducees rejected doctrines. Now, this is whenever the Hasmonean king was set, Herod. And so there was two different beliefs. There was a real legalistic belief by the Pharisees, and then you had these guys here. These guys were strictly the 5 books written in the Torah, which are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They did not believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in the immortality of the souls. They controlled the temple in Jerusalem. Let's see. The Sadducees were rivals with the Pharisees. Go to the Pharisees. I don't really need it, but we'll put it up there. The Pharisees were a religious sect, school of thought. They believed in the oral law. They not only did they believe in the Bible, but they actually added things to the Bible. They made life hard for the Jewish people at the time. This was at the time of Jesus. And so we have these two religious sects that were there. They conflicted each other. They didn't fight. They conflicted each other. They weren't friends, but they were there. And now later on, as we go through the Gospel of John, we see that they unite quite a bit to get rid of this Jesus that's about to come on the scene. So that was it. That was it, guys. Did I have any more slides? I didn't know if I want to share anything. I think I went through all that I wanted to, the best I could. I'm sorry, guys. So that brings us back to the Gospel of John, if we want to go there. So we see at the Gospel of John that we are under Roman rule. Now we sort of know why that they're under Roman rule after that 400 years of silence, so to speak. We really know that it was silent. There was no direct revelation from God. But we know that in the book of Daniel, it talks about that intertestamental period extensively, especially about the Greeks coming in and ruling the world, and then the Romans, of course. So we see that in 63, the Romans are there. They had conquered the whole world. In the book of Daniel, it really looks like that this last beast was going to go in there and kill everybody. But as we see, we're in the book of Romans, the Israelites who are under their control are relatively not living bad. Am I wrong about that? They're not under constant threat of being killed for this or that. In fact, they have to go through trials for anything like that to happen. So, what's happening here is we're getting into the book of John, After all of those years of being ruled by other nations, we're talking about all the way back to 600, 700 BC, the Israelites were being ruled by one nation or another. But specifically, the Babylonians, and then the Persians, and then the Greek, and now the Romans. So for these 500, 600 years, they're under the authority of other nations. And I think they're getting tired of it. And they're looking for that promised Messiah. They're looking for that promised Messiah. And so, let me go back here. And so now before Jesus comes, who is supposed to show up on the scene? Anybody know who's supposed to show up on the scene? Some say John the Baptist, yes. Elijah? What about in the book of Isaiah? The voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. So there's supposed to be a forerunner. Okay, so we're in the Gospel of John. I want to ask Lisa, do you want to read any today? Okay, let me look at my time here. Okay, we're in the Gospel of John. What did we make it to last week? We got through verse 1. We got through verse 2. Verse 3, I think we even read, where all things were created through him and for him. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. I think, did we get through that? But anyways, I'll start in verse 4. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. So Jesus comes into the world, and in one part of the gospel, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. That's the wonderful thing about the Gospel of John is we have the 7 I am statements from Jesus. And it also says that, in the beginning was that word, that Mamre, the word that the Jewish people did not want to say because of their reverence for God. They didn't think they were worthy to say the name of God, so they would say that name, that word, And so that was what John starts out with. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 6. Miss Debbie, do you want to read verse 6 and 7 and maybe more? I don't know. Yeah, for a second. So here's the forerunner. But it doesn't say it. It says there was a man that came from God, and he came to bear witness to that light. In the Gospel of John, we start right there. Is this John the same person that wrote the Gospel of John? Is John the Baptist the same person that wrote the Gospel of John? The first answer was from Noah. He said no, and Noah is yes, correct. John the Baptist did not write the Gospel of John. Of course, that was John the Apostle. Okay, John the Baptist, I don't think he would have had time to write the Gospel of John. But anyways, back in the book of Matthew, it talks more about where John the Baptist came from. Does anybody know who John the Baptist's father was? I'm going to sit here. In fact, Lisa, I'm sorry, you played Elizabeth in a play one time, okay? His mother was Elizabeth. His father was a priest, and his name was Zacharias. So he came from a priestly family. He was from the Levitical family. So John the Baptist's father was Zacharias, and whenever the angel Gabriel went to Zacharias and told Zacharias, you're going to have a son, and Zacharias was like, how? Show me a sign. So he said, yeah, I'll show you a sign. And he said, you're not going to be able to speak until the day of the baby's birth. So Zacharias could not speak until the day that John the Baptist was born. So that's one of the things that happened. And on the day that John the Baptist was born, they asked Elizabeth, what's the baby's name? And she said, John. And they wanted to ask Zacharias. He couldn't say, and he wrote it down. And once he wrote it down, he was able to say his name is John, because the angel Gabriel said his name will be called John. And he will be the voice of one crying in the wilderness. So that's we're seeing biblical prophecy being fulfilled through the life of John the Baptist right here. What time is it, guys? I shouldn't have got comfortable. 10:19. Okay, so we see that John the Baptist is on the scene, and in verse 10, he goes on, and he's talking a little bit more about what he's there for. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. So this is John the Baptist giving prophecy on the Lord Jesus Christ. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. That's a good verse right there. He came to his own, but his own did not receive him. So this is John the Baptist speaking on Jesus. Who is Jesus' own? Answer the questions. You guys know the answers to these. The Jewish people. The Jewish people. The Jewish people, that's right. He came to his own brethren, his own sisters. So, he came to the world, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. So we're here, and we're at the beginning of the ministry of John the Baptist, and we're in the Gospel of John, and he's telling us about Jesus is about to come. And we are about to get into the ministry of Jesus Christ. John the Baptist is the forerunner, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. And later on, we'll read that they actually ask him, are you Elijah? What does he say? Do you remember, John? They asked John the Baptist, are you Elijah? Because Elijah was prophesied. John the Baptist says no. He says no to them. And right. Let me see here. I got a scripture here that I think that I want to go to. I got it wrote down. It's in the book of Matthew. Matthew. Yes. Exactly. He said, I am not Elijah. But in Matthew 11, in verse 14, says, let me actually start in 13. And this is Jesus speaking. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah. Matthew 11:14. Who is to come? Who has ears to hear, let him hear. Although John the Baptist says, I am not Elijah, Jesus said he is Elijah, but he meant to say he is Elijah. He comes in the spirit of Elijah. So, okay, all right. We're going to end up our lesson right there, guys. We got into a lot of historic overview there. I hope you enjoyed that. If you ever want any of